In the year 129 AC, the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryen civil war for the Iron Throne, turned from a war of words to one of fire and blood that would bring the House of the Dragon to its knees, when Prince Aemond Targaryen, the second son of the late King Viserys and Alicent Hightower, killed his nephew, the second son of Rhaenyra Targaryen, Lucerys Velaryon, in the skies above Shipbreaker Bay. From that day henceforth, Aemond would forever be known as Aemond the Kinslayer to his foes. He returned to King's Landing, having won the support of Storm's End, and thus House Baratheon for his brother, King Aegon II, and the undying enmity and rage of his half-sister, Queen Rhaenyra. Aemond had thought to receive a hero's welcome upon his return to King's Landing. He was bitterly disappointed. Dowager Queen Alicent Hightower, his mother, went pale when she heard what he had done, crying, "Mother, have mercy on us all." Nor was Sir Otto Hightower, his grandfather, pleased. "You only lost one eye," he's reported to have said. "How could you be so blind?" The king himself, Aegon, did not share their concerns. He welcomed his brother home with a great feast, hailed him as the true blood of the dragon, and announced that he had made a good beginning. When Queen Rhaenyra sent her two eldest sons as envoys to the Lords of Westeros, her eldest, Prince Jacaerys Velaryon, had been given the longest and at the time thought most dangerous of the trips. Jace was first to fly on Dragonback to the Vale to treat with Lady Jane Arryn, before flying on to the north and Winterfell, the ancient seat of House Stark. When Jacaerys Velaryon descended upon the Eyrie on his young dragon Vermac to win the Vale of Arryn for his mother, he had no clue of the fate of his younger brother Lucerys on his own mission to Storm's End. The Maiden of the Vale, Lady Jane Arryn, 35 years of age, was 20 years his senior. Never wed, Lady Jane had reigned over the Vale since the death of her father and elder brothers at the hands of the Stonecrows of the Hills when she was 3. Given Rhaenyra's mother had been a member of House Arryn, Aemma Arryn, the Blacks felt confident in her support, though as we know from their confidence with Boros Baratheon, that can never be a given. The account of the Full Mushroom tells us this famous maiden was in truth a high-born harlot, with a voracious appetite for men, and gives us salacious tales of how she offered Prince Jaehaerys the allegiance of the Vale only if he could bring her to climax with his tongue. However, Septon Eustace repeats the widespread rumour that Jane Arryn in fact preferred the intimate companionship of other women, but does go as far to state that there is no way to know if this is actually true. Grand Maester Munkin's true telling limits itself to the confines of the High Hall of the Eyrie, rather than the bedchambers, and it's through this source much of what occurred is known. "Thrice have my own kin sought to replace me," Lady Jane told Prince Jacaerys. "My cousin Sir Arnold is wont to say that women are too soft to rule. I have him in one of my sky cells, if you would like to ask him. Your Prince Daemon used his first wife most cruelly, it is true, but notwithstanding your mother's poor taste and consort, she remains our rightful queen, and my own blood besides, and Arryn on her mother's side. In this world of men, we women must band together. The Vale and its knights shall stand with her, if her grace will grant me one request." When the prince asked what that might be, she answered, "Dragons. I have no fear of armies. Many and more have broken themselves against my bloody gate, and the Eyrie is known to be impregnable. But you have descended on us from the sky, as Queen Visenya once did during the conquest, and I am powerless to halt you. I mislike feeling powerless. Send me a dragon rider." And so the prince agreed, and Lady Jane knelt before him and bade her warriors to kneel, as all swore him their swords. Before he mounted his dragon for the long ride north, Jacaerys sent word to Dragonstone of his success and the request of a dragon rider to be sent to the Vale in return for Lady Jane's support. Prince Jacaerys and his dragon Vermax continued on their mission to negotiate with the Lords of Westeros on behalf of his mother, Queen Rhaenyra. After successfully gaining the support of Lady Jane Arryn and the Vale Lords, Jacaerys Velaryon soared his way up north, across the Fingers and the waters of the Bight. Given how far he needed to travel to reach Winterfell, he stopped for a short time at the Sisters, at Sisterton, where Lord Borrell and Lord Sunderland did obedience to him and pledged him the support of the 3 sisters. While the Lords of the Sisters would have little involvement and little power to influence the outcome of the Dance of the Dragons, the support of more lords, be them big or small, was a welcome boost to the cause of Rhaenyra. After Sisterton, Jace then flew on to White Harbour, where Lord Desmond Manderley met him in the Merman's Court. While not the seat of power in the north, White Harbour is no less important than the ancient seat of House Stark. White Harbour is the only true city in the north, with it being a key part of the north's small but important naval assets and trade. Having House Manderley on side would be a huge boost regardless. But it was at White Harbour the prince faced a shrewder bargainer. White Harbour is not unsympathetic to your mother's plight, Lord Manderley declared. My own forebears were despoiled of their birthright when our enemies drove us into exile on these cold northern shores. When the old king Jaehaerys visited us long ago, he spoke of the wrong that had been done to us and promised to make redress. In pledge of that, King Jaehaerys had offered the hand of his daughter, Princess Visera, to my great-grandsire, that our two houses be made as one. But Visera died, and the promise was forgotten. It is said that Prince Jaehaerys knew what was being asked of him before Lord Manderley had even finished talking. Before he left White Harbour on the road to Winterfell, a compact was drawn up and signed, by the terms of which Lord Manderley's youngest daughter would be wed to the prince's brother, Joffrey, once the war was over. After the long journey north, having won the support of House Arryn and House Manderley for his mother, Queen Rhaenyra, Jaehaerys Velaryon finally arrived at his most important destination, Winterfell, the ancient seat of House Stark. Whoever Lord Cregan Stark backed in the war would in principle win the support of the North as a whole. Cregan Stark, in time, would become known as the Old Man of the North, but the Lord of Winterfell was only 21 years of age when Prince Jaehaerys came to him in 129 AC. Cregan had come into his lordship at 13 upon the death of his father, Lord Rickon. During his minority, his uncle Bernard had ruled the north as regent, but in 124 AC, Cregan turned 16, only to find his uncle slow to surrender his power. Relations between the two grew strained, as the young lord chafed under the limitations imposed upon him by his father's brother. Finally, in 126 AC, Cregan Stark rose up, imprisoned Bernard and his 3 sons, and took the rule of the north into his own hands. Soon after, he wed Lady Aranori, a beloved companion since childhood, only to have her die 128 AC, whilst giving birth to a son and heir, whom Cregan named Rickon, after his father. Autumn was well advanced when Jaehaerys Velaryon arrived at Winterfell. The snows were laying deep upon the ground, and a cold wind was howling from the north, and Lord Stark was in the midst of his preparations for the coming winter. Yet he still gave Jaehaerys a warm welcome. Snow and ice and cold had made his dragon Vermax ill-tempered, it is said, so the prince did not linger long amongst the Northmen, but many curious tales came out of that short stay. The true telling of Maester Munkin tells us that Lord Cregan and Jaehaerys Velaryon took a great liking to each other very quickly, as Jace reminded the Lord of Winterfell of his own younger brother who had died 10 years before. They drank together, hunted together, trained together, and swore an oath of brotherhood sealed in blood. Maester Munkin's account seems a lot more realistic than that as set in Eustace, wherein the prince spent most of his visit attempting to persuade Lord Cregan to give up his false god and accept the worship of the Seven. But as usual, we must turn to the account of the full Mushroom, who we must note was never at Winterfell, to inform us of the more scandalous events that are rumoured to have happened during the prince's stay in the north. Mushroom's account includes a young maiden, or wolf girl as he dubs her, with the name of Sarah Snow. So smitten was Prince Jaehaerys with this creature, a bastard daughter of the late Lord Rickon Stark, half-sister to Cregan, that he lay with her every night. On learning that his guest had claimed the maidenhead of his bastard sister, Lord Cregan became most wroth, and only softened when Sarah Snow told him that the prince had taken her for his wife, that they had spoken their vows in the Winterfell's own godswood, before a heart tree, and only then had she given herself to him, wrapped in furs amidst the snows, as the old gods looked on. Whilst this does make for a charming tale, the singers have fallen in love with in the years since. But as with many of Mushroom's tales, it does seem to partake more of the fool's imaginings than historical truth. Jaehaerys Velaryon had been betrothed to his cousin, Baelor Targaryen, since he was 4 and she 2, and from all we know of his character, it does seem very unlikely that he would break such a solemn agreement to protect the uncertain virtue of some half-wild, unwashed northern bastard. if indeed there ever lived a Sarah Snow, and if indeed the Prince of Dragonstone lay with her daily, it is no more than any other prince has done in the past and will do in the future. But to talk of marriage seems a reach. However, in the matter of Sarah Snow, all we can really say is this. We can never know the truth of it. But even if she is just a tale, she is an interesting tale at that. Mushroom also goes on to claim that Vermax have to clutch a dragon eggs at Winterfell. Whilst it is true that determining the gender of a living dragon is nigh on impossible, no other source mentions Vermax producing so much as a single egg, so it must be assumed that he was a male. Septon Barth, who studied the biology of dragons, speculates that dragons change sex at need, being as mutable as a flame. However, most maesters think this idea too ludicrous to consider, but even so, there is no record of a dragon egg ever being found around Winterfell. All we can say for sure of Jace's trip to Winterfell is that Cregan Stark and Jacaerys Velaryon reached an accord and signed and sealed the agreement that Grand Maester Munkin went on to call the Pact of Ice and Fire. Like many such pacts, it was to be sealed with a marriage. Lord Cregan's son Rickon was a year old. Prince Jacaerys was as yet unmarried and childless, but it was assumed that he would sire children of his own once his mother sat upon the Iron Throne uncontested. Under the terms of the pact, the prince's firstborn daughter would be sent north at the age of 7 to be fostered at Winterfell until such a time as she was old enough to marry Lord Cregan's heir. And with that, Jacaerys Velaryon had won the support of House Stark and the North for his mother. Across Blackwater Bay on Dragonstone, Queen Rhaenyra collapsed when she was told of Lucerys' death. Luke's younger brother, Joffrey, swore a terrible oath of vengeance against Prince Aemond and Lord Boros Baratheon. His elder brother Jace had not yet heard of the news, still on his mission to treat with Cregan Stark in the North. Only the intervention of the boy's grandparents, the sea snake Corlys Velaryon, and Princess Rhaenys kept the boy from mounting his own small dragon at once and flying straight to the Red Keep. As the Black Council sat to consider how to strike back, a raven arrived from Harrenhal. It said one sentence: an eye for an eye, a son for a son. Prince Daemon Targaryen wrote, "Lucerys shall be avenged." Something important to recall is that in his youth, Daemon Targaryen had been the prince of the city, the captain of the Gold Cloaks, for it was him who had given them their cloak. His face and laugh, familiar to every cut-purse, whore and gambler in Fleabottom. That Daemon still had friends in the low places of King's Landing was a given, and followers amongst the Gold Cloaks still despised their captains and sergeants, being replaced by men loyal to Otto Hightower. Unbeknownst to King Aegon II, the Hand, Otto, and the Dowager Queen Alicent, he also had allies at court, even on the Green Council itself, and one other go-between, a special friend he trusted utterly, who knew the wine sinks and rat pits that festered in the shadows of the Red Keep, as well as Daemon himself, and moved easily through the shadows of the city. To this pale stranger, he reached out now by secret ways to set a terrible vengeance in motion. Amidst the stews of Fleabottom, Prince Daemon's go-between found suitable instruments for vengeance. One had been a sergeant in the city watch, big and brutal. He had lost his gold cloak for beating a whore to death whilst in a drunken rage. The other was a rat catcher in the Red Keep. Their true names are lost to history, but they are remembered as Blood and Cheese. According to the full Mushroom, Cheese knew the Red Keep better than the shape of his own cock. The hidden doors and secret tunnels that Maegor the Cruel had built were as familiar to the Ratcatcher as the rats he had hunted. There were even many he did not even know these secret ways existed. Using a forgotten passageway, Cheese led Blood into the heart of the castle, unseen by any guards. Some say their quarry was the king himself, but Aegon was always accompanied by the Kingsguard wherever he went. Even Cheese knew of no way in and out of Maegor's Holdfast, save over the drawbridge that spanned the dry moat and its formidable iron spikes. The Tower of the Hand was less secure, however. The two men crept up through the walls, bypassing the spearmen posted at the tower doors. Sir Otto's rooms were of no interest to them. Instead, they slipped into his daughter's chambers, one floor below. Dowager Queen Alicent had taken up residence there after the death of King Viserys, when her son Aegon had moved into Maegor's Holdfast with his own queen. Once inside, Cheese bound and gagged the Dowager Queen, whilst Blood strangled her bedmaid to death. They then settled down to wait, for they knew it was the custom of Queen Haelena to bring her children to see their grandmother every evening before bed. Blind to her danger, the queen appeared as dusk was setting over the castle, accompanied by her 3 children, the twins Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, who were 6, and the baby Maelor, who was 2 years old. As they entered the apartments, Haelena was holding his little hand, calling out her mother's name. Blood barred the door and slew the queen's guardsman, while Cheese appeared to snatch up Maelor. "Scream and you all die," Blood told her grace. Queen Haelena kept her calm, it is said. "Who are you?" she demanded of the 2 debt collectors, said Cheese. "An eye for an eye, a son for a son. We only want the one. To square things. Won't hurt the rest of you fine folk. Not one little hair. Which one you want to lose, your grace?" Once she realized what he meant, Queen Haelena pleaded with the men to kill her instead. "A wife is not a son," said Blood. "It has to be a boy." Cheese warned the queen to make a choice soon, before Blood grew bored and raped her little girl. "Pick," he said, "or we kill them all." On her knees weeping, Haelena named her youngest Maelor. Perhaps she thought the boy was too young to understand. Or perhaps it was because the older boy, Jaehaerys, was King Aegon's firstborn son and heir, next in line to the Iron Throne. "You hear that, little boy?" Cheese whispered to Maelor. "Your mama wants you dead." Then he gave Blood a grin, and the hulking swordsman slew Prince Jaehaerys, striking off the boy's head with a single blow. The queen began to scream. Strange to say, the rat-catcher and the butcher were true to their word. In that moment, they could have killed Alicent, Haelena, and all of King Aegon's children, but they did no further harm, but rather fled with the prince's head in hand. A hue and a cry went up, but Cheese knew the secret passages as the guards did not, and the killers made their escape. 2 days after the Blood and Cheese incident, Blood was seized at the gates of the god, trying to leave King's Landing, with the head of Prince Jaehaerys hidden in one of his saddle sacks. Under torture, he confessed that he had been trying to take it to Harrenhal to collect his reward from Prince Daemon. He also gave up the description of the whore he claimed who had hired them, an older woman, foreign by her talk, cloaked in a hood, very pale. The other harlots called her Misery. After 13 days of torment, Blood was at last allowed to die. Queen Alicent had commanded Larys Strong, the Clubfoot, to learn his true name, so they might bathe in the blood of his wife and children. But our sources do not say if this occurred. Sir Luthor Largent and his gold cloaks searched the street of silk from top to bottom and stripped every harlot in King's Landing. But no trace of Cheese or the White Worm was ever found. In his grief and fury, King Aegon II commanded that all the city's rat-catchers be taken out and hanged, and this was done. So Otto Hightower brought in 100 cats to the Red Keep to take their place. Though Blood and Cheese had spared her life, Queen Haelena cannot be said to have survived that fateful dusk. Afterward, she would not eat, nor bathe, nor leave her chambers, and she could no longer stand to look upon her son, Maelor, knowing that she had named him to die. The king had no recourse but to take the boy from her and give him over to his mother, the Dowager Queen Alicent, to raise as if he were her own. Aegon and his wife slept separately thereafter, and Queen Haelena sank deeper and deeper into madness, while the king raged and drank. Many die in war, both men grown and young children, but many may disagree that regardless of politics, Blood and Cheese will always be recalled in the annals of Westerosi history as one of the darkest days to ever happen in the history of House Targaryen. King Aegon II Targaryen desired to avenge the murder of his heir by means of an attack on Dragonstone, descending on the island citadel on Dragonback to seize or slay his half-sister and her bastard sons. It took the entirety of the Green Council to dissuade him from this course of action. It was Sir Criston Cole who urged a very different course, however. The Pretender Queen had made use of stealth and treachery to murder Prince Jaehaerys. Let them do the same. We will pay her back in her own bloody coin, he told the king. The instrument of the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard's wrath, whom he chose for the king's vengeance, was his own sworn brother, Sir Arryk Cargill. Sir Arryk was said to be intimately familiar with the ancient seat of House Targaryen, having visited there often during the reign of King Viserys. Many fishermen still plied the waters of Blackwater Bay, even during the height of the Civil War, as Dragonstone depended on the sea for its food supply. It would be a very simple thing to deliver Cargill to a fishing village under the castle without being seen. From there, he can make his own way up to the Queen. And Sir Arryk and his brother Sir Eric were twins, identical in almost all respects, so much so Not even the fellows of the Kingsguard could tell the two knights apart. Once clad in white, Sir Aric should be able to freely move about Dragonstone without any questions being asked of him. Sir Criston Cole was adamant that any guard who chanced to encounter him would surely mistake him for his brother. Sir Aric did not undertake this mission happily. Indeed, according to Septon Eustace, the troubled knight visited the Red Keep Sept on the night he was meant to set sail, to pray for forgiveness to the Mother above. Yet, as a Kingsguard knight, he was sworn to obey his king and commander. He had no choice in honour but to make his way to Dragonstone, clad in the salt-stained garb of a simple fisherman. The true purpose of Sir Aric's mission remains a matter of some contention even to this day. Grand Maester Munkin has suggested to us that Aric Cargill had been commanded to slay Queen Rhaenyra, putting an end to her so-called rebellion at a stroke, while the courtful mushroom insists her sons were in fact Cargill's prey. That Aegon II wished to wash out the blood of his own murdered son, Jaehaerys, with that of his bastard nephews, Jacaerys and Joffrey. It is said that Sir Aric came ashore with no hindrance, donned his armour and white cloak, and had no trouble gaining entrance to the castle in the guise of his twin brother, just as Criston Cole had planned. Deep in the heart of Dragonstone, however, as he was making his way to the royal apartments, the gods brought him face to face with none other than Sir Aric Cargill himself, who knew at once what his twin brother's presence meant. The singers tell us that Sir Aric said, "I love you, brother," as he unsheathed his blade, and that Sir Aric replied, "And I love you, brother," as he drew his own sword. It is said the twins battled for the best part of an hour, the clash of steel on steel waking half of the Queen's court, but the onlookers could only stand by helplessly and watch, as no man there could tell which brother was which. In the end, Sir Aric and Sir Eric dealt each other mortal wounds, and died in one another's arms, with tears upon their cheeks. However, the full Mushroom's account is much shorter, saltier, and altogether a whole lot nastier. According to the Fool, the fight lasted only moments. There was no declarations of brotherly love, with each Cargill denouncing the other as a traitor as they clashed. Sir Eric was standing above his twin on the spiral steps, striking the first mortal blow as a savage downward cut that nigh took off his brother's sword arm at the shoulder. As he collapsed, Sir Aric grasped his slayer's white cloak and pulled him close enough to drive a dagger deep into his belly. Sir Aric was dead before the first guards managed to arrive, but Sir Eric took 4 days to die of his gut wound, screaming in horrible pain and cursing his traitor brother all the while. For obvious reasons, in the wake of the event, singers and storytellers have shown a marked preference for the tale as told by Munkin, with 2 loving brothers fighting to the death for their preferred claimant to the Iron Throne. Maesters and other scholars must make their own determination as to which is most likely. All that Septon Eustace says upon the matter is that the Cargill twins slew each other, and that's all we can really know. But the lesson of this story is that civil war between the members of House Targaryen not only divided the house, the High Lords, the Smallfolk, and the members of the Kingsguard, but 2 brothers whom lost their lives defending the rights of the claimant they believed was the rightful ruler of Westeros. The legacy and songs of the twins became well known up and down Westeros for generations. Otto Hightower was losing the trust of his grandson, the king, with Aegon mistaking his efforts for inaction and his caution for cowardice. One tale spun by Septon Eustace states that one day Aegon entered the Tower of the Hand and found Sir Otto writing another letter, whereupon he knocked the inkpot into his grandfather's lap, declaring, "Thrones are won with swords, and not quills. Spill blood, not ink." The sudden fall of Harrenhal to Prince Daemon came as a great shock. Until that moment, Aegon had believed his half-sister's cause to be hopeless, and made the king realise that his situation was far more perilous than it had seemed. These fears deepened as ravens returned from the Reach, where the Greens had believed themselves strongest. House Hightower of Oldtown was solidly behind King Aegon, as too was House Redwyne of the Arbor, but elsewhere, in the south, other lords were declaring for Rhaenyra, amongst them Lord Costane of Three Towers, Lord Mulador of Uplands, Lord Tarley of Horn Hill, Lord Rowan of Golden Grove, and Lord Grim of Greyshield. Loudest amongst these traitors was Sir Alan Beesbury, Lord Lyman's heir, who was demanding the release of his grandfather from the dungeons, where most believed the former Master of Coin to be confined, when in reality he had been killed at the Green Council. Faced with such a clamour for their own bannerman, the Castellan, steward, and mother the young Lord Tyrell of Highgarden, acting as regent for the babe, suddenly thought better of their support of King Aegon, and decided House Tyrell would take no part in the Dance of the Dragons. King Aegon began to drown his fears in strong wine, Septon Eustace tells us. Sir Otto Hightower sent word to his nephew, Lord Aemond, beseeching him to use the power of Oldtown to put down these rash rebellions of the Reach. Other blows followed. The Vale, White Harbour, Winterfell, the Blackwoods and other river lords steamed to Harrenhal and Prince Daemon's banner. Then the Sea Snake, Corlys Velaryon's fleets, closed Blackwater Bay, and every morning King Aegon had merchants whining at him. His grace had no answer for their complaints, beyond yet another cup of strong wine. Do something, he demanded of his grandfather, Sir Otto. The Hand assured him that something was being done. Otto had hatched a plan to break the Velaryon blockade and restore trade to the King's Landing, all the while dealing Rhaenyra a crippling blow. One of the chief pillars of the support for Rhaenyra's claim was her consort, yet Prince Daemon represented one of her greatest weaknesses as well. The prince had made more foes than friends during the course of the adventures of his youth. Otto Hightower, who had been amongst the first of those foes, now reached out across the narrow sea to another of the prince's enemies, the kingdom of the Three Daughters, who Daemon had spent years fighting in the Stepstones. By itself, royal fleet Aegon had access to lacked the strength to break the Sea Snake's chokehold on the gullet. Lord Corlys's ships were more numerous and better built than those of House Targaryen. King Aegon's overtures to Dalton Greyjoy of Pyke had thus far failed to win the Iron Islands to his side. The combined fleet of Tyrosh, Lys and Myr would be more than a match for the Velaryons. So Otto Hightower sent word to the magisters of these cities, promising exclusive trading rights at King's Landing if they were to clear the gullet of the Sea Snake ships and open up the sea lanes once again. To add savour to the stew, he also promised to cede the Stepstones to the Three Daughters. Though in truth the Iron Throne never had a proper claim on the island chain, the Triarchy was never quick to move. Lacking a true king, and with each party wishing to serve their own best interest, all important decisions in this three-headed kingdom were decided by the High Council. 11 magisters from each city made up its members, every man of them intent on demonstrating his own sagacity, shrewdness, and importance, and winning every possible advantage for his own city. Grand Maester Graydon wrote the definitive history of the Kingdom of the Three Daughters 50 years later and described it as 33 horses, each pulling in its own direction. Even issues as timely as war, peace and alliance were subject to endless debate, and the High Council was not even in session when Sir Otto's envoys arrived there. The delay did not sit well with the young king. Aegon had run short of patience with his grandfather. Though his mother, the Dowager Queen Alicent, spoke up in her father's defence, Aegon turned a deaf ear to her pleading. Summoning Otto to the throne room, he tore the chain of office from his neck and tossed it to Sir Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. "My new hand is a still fist," Aegon boasted. "We are done with writing letters." Sir Criston Cole wasted no time improving his mettle. "It is not for you to plead for support from your lords, like a beggar pleading for alms," he told Aegon. "You are the lawful king of Westeros, and those who deny it are traitors. It is past time they learnt the price of treason. First to pay the price were the captive lords languishing in the dungeons under the Red Keep, men who had once sworn to defend the rights of Princess Rhaenyra and still stubbornly refused to bend the knee to King Aegon. One by one, they were dragged out into the castle ward, where the king's justice awaited them with his axe. Each man was given one final chance to swear fealty to Aegon. Only Lord Butterwell, Lord Stokeworth, Lord Rosby chose to do so. Lord Hayford, Merryweather, Hart, Buckler, Caswell, and Lady Fell valued their sworn word more than their lives, and were beheaded each in turn, along with 8 landed knights and 20 servants and retainers. The heads were mounted on spikes above the gates of King's Landing. Late in the year 129 AC, mindful of the promises he had made to the Maiden of the Vale, Jane Arryn, Jace ordered Prince Joffrey to fly to Goldtown with Tyraxis. Monkin suggested that Jace desired to keep his brother far from the fighting. This did not sit well with Joffrey, who was determined to prove himself in battle. Only when told that he was being sent to defend the Vale against King Aegon's dragons did Joffrey grudgingly consent to going. Rhaenyra, the 13-year-old daughter of Prince Daemon by Laena Velaryon, was chosen to accompany him. Known to history as Rhaenyra of Pentos for the city of her birth, she was no dragon rider, her hatchling having died some years before, but she brought 3 dragon eggs with her to the Vale, where she prayed nightly for their hatching. Lady Rhaenyra's twin, Baela, remained on Dragonstone. Long betrothed to Prince Jacaerys, she refused to leave him, insisting that she would fight beside him on her own dragon, though Moondancer was too small to bear her weight. Though Baela also announced her intent to marry Jacaerys at once, no wedding was ever held. Monkin says the prince did not wish to wed until the war was over, whilst the Full Mushroom claims Jacaerys was already married to Sarah Snow, the mysterious bastard girl from Winterfell. The Prince of Dragonstone also had a care for the safety of his half-brothers, Aegon the Younger and Viserys. Their father, Prince Daemon, had made many friends in the free city of Pentos during his visits there, so Jacaerys reached across the narrow sea to the prince of that city, who agreed to foster the 2 boys until Rhaenyra had secured the Iron Throne. In the waning days of 129 AC, the young princes boarded the cog Gay Abaddon, Aegon with his hatchling Stormcloud, Viserys clutching his dragon egg, to set sail for Essos. The Sea Snake sent 7 of his warships with them as escort to see they reached Pentos safely. Something that was always going to play a key role in the Civil War was the cursed seat of Harrenhal, due to its strategically important location on the shores of the God's Eye in the Riverlands. Whoever controlled the ruin controlled the most direct path to King's Landing, with any forces coming from the Westerlands, North or Riverlands having to pass it. Thus, it was the first target for Prince Daemon Targaryen when he made his first tactical move of the war. Though large parts of Harren's Great Folly were in ruins, the castle's towering curtain walls still made it a formidable stronghold as any in the Riverlands. But Aegon the Conqueror had proven his vulnerability from the sky, with his lord, Larys Strong, away in King's Landing supporting King Aegon II and the Greens. The castle was left lightly garrisoned. Having no wish to suffer the fate of Black Harren, its elderly Castellan, Sir Simon Strong, uncle to the late Lord Lionel, great-uncle to Lord Larys, was quick to strike his banners when Caraxes landed atop the King's Spire Tower. In addition to the castle, Prince Daemon, at a stroke, had captured the non-inconsiderable wealth of House Strong and a dozen valuable hostages, amongst them Sir Simon and his grandsons. The castle's Smallfolk became his captive as well, among them a wet nurse named Alice Rivers. Who was this woman? A serving wench who dabbed in potions and spells, says Maester Monkin. A woods witch, claims Septon Eustace. A malign enchantress who bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth, the Full Mushroom would have us believe. Her name, Rivers, suggests a bastard birth, but we know little of her father, and even less of her mother. Monkin and Eustace tell us she was sired by Lord Lionel Strong in his youth, making him a natural half-sister to his sons, Harwin and Larys. But Mushroom insists that she was much older, that she was in fact the wet nurse for both boys, and perhaps even to their father a generation earlier. Though her own children had all been born stillborn, the milk that flowed so abundantly from the breast of Alice Rivers had nourished countless babes born of other women at Harrenhal. Was she in truth a witch who lay with demons, bringing forth dead children as payment for the knowledge they gave her? Was she a simple slattern, as Eustace believes, a wanton who used her potions and poisons to bind men to her, body and soul? Alice Rivers was at least in her late 30s, nearer 40 years of age during the Dance of the Dragons. That much is known. The Full Mushroom makes her even older than that, but all agree she looked younger than her years. But whether this was simply happenstance or achieved through practices of dark arts, many continue to dispute to this day. Whatever her powers, it would seem Daemon Targaryen was immune to them, but little is heard of the supposed sorceress while the prince held Harrenhal. The sudden, bloodless fall of Black Harren's seat was counted a great victory for Queen Rhaenyra and her Blacks. It served as a sharp reminder of the martial prowess of Prince Daemon and the power of his dragon Caraxes, the Bloodworm, and he gave his queen a stronghold in the heart of Westeros, to which her supporters up and down the kingdom could rally to, and Rhaenyra had many such in the lands that watered the River Trident. When Prince Daemon sent forth his call to arms, they rose up all along the rivers, knights and men-at-arms and humble peasants, who yet remembered the realm's delight, so beloved of her father, and the way she smiled and charmed them as she made her royal progress through the riverlands in her youth. Hundreds, then thousands, buckled on their sword belts and donned their mail, or grabbed a pitchfork or a hoe or a crude wooden shield, and began to make their way to Harrenhal to fight for Viserys' little girl. The lords of the Trident, having more to lose, were not so quick to move, but soon enough they too began to throw their lot in with the Queen. In the Riverlands, raiders out of Raventree Hall of House Blackwood crossed into the lands of House Bracken, burning crops, driving off sheep and cattle, sacking villages, and despoiling every set they came on, as the Blackwoods were one of the last houses south of the Neck who still followed the old gods. When the Brackens managed to weather these attacks, they were able to gather a strong force to strike back, but Lord Samuel Blackwood surprised them on the march, taking them unawares as they camped beneath a riverside mill. In the fight that followed, the mill was put to the torch, and the men fought and died for hours, bathed in the red light of the flames. Sir Amos Bracken, leading the host from Stonehenge, cut down and slew Lord Blackwood in a single combat, only to perish himself when a rearward arrow found the eye slit of his helm and drove deep into his skull. Supposedly, that shaft was loosed by Lord Samuel's 16-year-old sister, Alicent, who would later be known in the history books as Black Ali, but whether this fact or mere family legend cannot truly be known. Many other grievous losses were suffered by both sides in what became known as the Battle of the Burning Mill, the first true ground battle or the Dance of the Dragons. The two houses had been bitter rivals for centuries. Thus, when House Bracken declared for Aegon, it was natural House Blackwood would do so for Rhaenyra, using the pretext of civil war to fight each other once more. The Brackens finally broke and fled back unto their own lands under the command of Sir Amos's bastard half-brother, Sir Rhaelon Rivers. It was only to find that Stonehenge had been taken in their absence. Led by Prince Daemon upon Caraxes, a strong host made up of Darries, Roots, Pipers and Freys had captured the castle by storm. In the absence of so much of House Bracken's strength, we don't know if the Blackwoods' attack was coordinated in order to lure the strength of House Bracken away from their castle, but needless to say, Prince Daemon used this distraction well. Lord Humphrey Bracken and his remaining children had been made captive, along with his third wife and base-born paramour. Rather than see them come to harm, Sir Rhaelon yielded. With House Bracken thus broken and defeated, the last of King Aegon's supporters in the Riverlands lost heart and laid down their own swords as well, and thus Prince Daemon now controlled the vital seat of Harrenhal and the whole of the Riverlands itself in the name of his wife, Queen Rhaenyra. In King's Landing, King Aegon II's Master of Whispers, Larys Strong, the Clubfoot, had taken time to draw up a list of all of those lords who had gathered on Dragonstone to attend Queen Rhaenyra's coronation and sit upon her Black Council. Lords Celtigar and Velaryon had their seats on islands within Blackwater Bay. Thus, as Aegon II had no strength at sea for the time being, they were beyond the reach of his wrath. Those Black Lords, whose lands were on the mainland, enjoyed no such protection, with 100 knights and 500 men-at-arms of the royal household, augmented by 3 times as many hardened sellswords. Sir Criston Cole, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard and Hand of the King, marched on the nearby castles of Rosby and Stokeworth, whose lords had only recently repented of their allegiances to Rhaenyra. He commanded them to prove their loyalty by adding their levies to his own. Cole's now much larger host advanced upon the walled harbour town of Duskendale to the north of King's Landing. The lords of Duskendale, House Darkland, were sworn to Rhaenyra. Despite the size of his host, Cole managed to somehow take the defenders by surprise. The town was sacked, the ships in the harbour set afire, and the Lord of Duskendale beheaded. His household knights and garrison were given a simple choice between swearing their swords to King Aegon or sharing their lord's fate. It is said that most chose to keep their heads and join Cole's forces. The castle of Rook's Rest was Sir Criston's next objective. However, unlike Duskendale, House Staunton were forewarned of their coming. Lord Staunton closed his gates and defied the attackers. Behind his walls, his lordship could only watch on as his fields and woods and villages were burned, his sheep and cattle run off, and his Smallfolk put to the sword. When provisions inside the castle began to run low, he dispatched a raven in a desperate plea to Dragonstone for help. The bird made it through Cole's archers and arrived as Rhaenyra and her supporters were mourning the death of Sir Eric Cargill of the Queen's Guard and debating the proper response to Aegon's latest attack at the heart of Dragonstone itself. Though shaken by the attempt on her life or the lives of her sons, the Queen was still reluctant to attack King's Landing directly. Maester Munkin states this was because of the horror of kinslaying. It is said that Maegor the Cruel had slain his own nephew, Aegon the Uncrowned, to take the crown for himself, and he was also involved in the death of another nephew, a Prince Viserys, whom was in his captivity. Thereafter, Maegor had been cursed, until he bled his life away upon his stolen throne. Seton Eustace claims Rhaenyra had a mother's heart that made her reluctant to risk the lives of her remaining sons. The courtful Mushroom alone was indeed present for these councils. He insists that Rhaenyra was still so grief-stricken by the death of her son Lucerys that she took no part in her own war councils altogether and left Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake, and his wife Princess Rhaenys Targaryen in command. Some scholars say that in this case, Mushroom's version of events seems the most likely, as we know that 9 days after Lord Staunton dispatched his plea for aid, the sound of leathern wings was heard across the narrow sea as the dragon Meleys appeared above Rook's Rest. The Red Queen, she was called, for the scarlet scales that covered her. The membranes of her wings were pink, her crest, horns, and claws bright as copper, and on her back, in steel and copper armour that flashed in the sun, rode Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was. Sir Criston Cole was not dismayed at the sight of Rhaenys and her dragon. Rather, Aegon's hand had expected this, counted on it in fact. Drums beat out a command, and archers rushed forward. Longbowmen, crossbowmen, both filling the air with arrows and quarrels. Scorpions were cranked upwards to loose iron bolts of the sort that had once killed the dragon Meraxes in the sands at dawn during the time of Aegon the Conqueror. Meleys suffered a score of hits, but the arrows only served to make her more angry. She swept down, spitting fire right and left. Knights burned in their saddles as the hair and hide and the harnesses of their horses went up in flames. Men-at-arms dropped their spears and scattered. Some foolishly tried to hide behind their shields, but neither oak nor iron could withstand the heat of a dragon's breath. So Criston Cole sat on his white horse the whole time, shouting, "Aim for the rider," through the smoke and flames. Meleys roared, smoke whirling from her nostrils, a stallion kicking in her jaws as tongues of fire engulfed him. In that moment, it may have seemed that all was lost for Sir Criston Cole. He had no defence against the power of a dragon. But then came an answering roar. 2 more winged shapes appeared high in the sky. The king, Aegon, astride Sunfire the Golden, and his brother, Aemond One-Eye, upon Vhagar, the last remaining dragon of the conquest. Criston Cole had sprung his trap, and Rhaenys had come snatching at the bait. Now the teeth closed around her. Although never tested in battle before, Princess Rhaenys never lacked for courage. She made no attempt to flee, and with a glad cry and a crack of her whip, she turned Meleys towards the foe. Against Vhagar alone, it may have been possible she might have had some chance, with the larger dragon slower than the smaller Meleys, and thus more cumbersome. But against Vhagar and Sunfire, together, her doom was all but certain. Such is the courage of Rhaenys. She too knew her fate was lightly sealed. The dragons met violently 1,000 feet above the field of battle below, as balls of fire burst and blossomed, so bright that men below swore later that the sky was full of suns. The crimson jaws of Meleys closed around Sunfire's golden neck for a moment, until Vhagar fell upon them both from above. All 3 beasts were spinning towards the ground, striking it so hard that stones fell from the battlements of Rook's Rest half a league away. Those closest to where the dragons fell did not live to tell the tale. Those farther off could not see through the flames and smoke. It was several hours before the fires guttered out, but from those ashes Only Aemond One-Eye and Vhagar rose unharmed. Meleys was dead, broken by the fall and ripped to pieces upon the ground, and Sunfire the Golden, the splendid golden beast, had one wing half torn from his body, but alive nonetheless. His royal rider had suffered broken ribs, a broken hip, and burns that covered half his body. His left arm was the worst. The dragon flame had burned so hot the king's armour had melted into his flesh. But King Aegon II lived. A body that is believed to be Rhaenys Targaryen was later found beside the broken carcass of her dragon, but it was so blackened that no one could be sure it was her. Beloved daughter of Lady Jocelyn Baratheon and Prince Aemond Targaryen, faithful wife to Lord Corlys Velaryon, mother to Laenor and Laena Velaryon, grandmother, the queen who never was, lived fearlessly and died amidst blood and fire. She was 55 years old. In total, 800 knights and squires and common men lost their lives that day. Another 100 perished not long after, when Prince Aemond and Sir Criston Cole took Rook's Rest and put the garrison to death. And with that, the first dragon battle of the Dance of the Dragons ended, while King Aegon II won the day. Rook's Rest would impact both the Blacks and the Greens directly and shape the events to come. After the Battle of Rook's Rest was all said and done, Lord Staunton's head was carried back to King's Landing and mounted above the old gate alongside the other supporters of Rhaenyra who'd refused to bend the knee to King Aegon. But few paid attention to yet another head added to the gate. It was in fact the head of the dragon Meleys that the people of King's Landing gathered to see. The Red Queen's head was drawn through the city on a cart that awed the crowds of the Smallfolk into silence. For the first time, the civil war became real for the people of King's Landing. They were of course used to the sight of dragons, but a dead one. It's likely that no one among the Smallfolk had ever seen a dead dragon. Septon Eustace tells us, after the dragon's head was paraded around the streets, thousands of the Smallfolk of King's Landing left the city to hide in the forests that surround the walls, hoping to avoid any bloodshed to come. That was until the Dowager Queen Alicent ordered the gates be barred and closed. King Aegon II did not die at Rook's Rest, as most had thought when his dragon crashed to the earth alongside that of Meleys and Rhaenys. Though it is said his burns brought him such pain that some say he prayed daily for death. Carried back to King's Landing in a closed litter to hide the extent of his injuries from the Smallfolk, Aegon did not rise from his bed for the rest of the year. Septons prayed for him. Maesters attended them with potions and milk with a poppy, but Aegon II slept 9 hours out of every 10, waking only long enough to take some meagre nourishment before he slept again. None were allowed to disturb his rest, save his mother, the Dowager Queen Alicent, and his hand, Sir Criston Cole. His wife never so much as made the attempt. So lost was Haelena in her own grief and madness after the murder of Prince Jaehaerys. The king's dragon Sunfire the Golden, once the most beautiful dragon in the realm, was too huge and heavy to be moved from Rook's Rest, and unable to fly with his injured wing, so he remained in the fields beyond Rook's Rest, crawling through the ashes like some great golden worm. In the early days he fed himself upon the burned carcasses of the slain. When those were gone, the men Sir Criston had left behind to guard him brought in calves and sheep. There the dragon would stay, until hopefully he would heal like his rider. There was still one lingering issue in King's Landing. Who would rule the realm and lead the war in place of Aegon, as he would need to spend the next few months healing from his injuries? You must rule the realm now, until your brother is strong enough to take the crown again, the king's hand Sir Criston Cole told Prince Aemond. Nor does Sir Criston need to say it twice, writes Eustace. As so, one-eyed Aemond the Kinslayer took up the iron and ruby crown of Aegon the Conqueror. It looks better on me than it ever did him, the prince proclaimed. Yet Aemond did not assume the style of king, but named himself only Protector of the Realm and Prince Regent. Sir Criston Cole remained hand of the king and would work alongside the Prince Regent in ruling the realm and the war that was still needing to be fought. All the while, the seeds Jaehaerys Velaryon had planted on his flight north had begun to bear fruit, and men were gathering at White Harbour, Winterfell, Barrowton, Sisterton, Goldtown, and the Gate of the Moon. Should they join their strength to that of the River Lords assembling at Harrenhal with Prince Daemon, even the strong walls of King's Landing might not be able to withstand them. Sir Criston warned the new Prince Regent. The tidings from the south were ominous as well. Lord Aemond Hightower had issued forth from Old Town with 1,000 knights, 1,000 archers, 3,000 men-at-arms, and uncounted thousands of camp followers, sellswords, free riders, and rabble, only to find himself set upon by Sir Alan Beesbury and Lord Alan Tarley. Though commanding far fewer men, the two Allans harassed him day and night, raiding his camps, murdering his scouts, and setting fires in his line of march. Farther south, Lord Costain had issued forth from Three Towers to fall upon Hightower's baggage train. Reports had reached his lordship that a host equalling the size of his own was descending upon the Mander, led by Thaddeus Rowan, Lord of Goldengrove. Lord Ormond had therefore decided he could not proceed without support from King's Landing. "We have need of your dragons," he wrote, supremely confident in his own prowess as a warrior and the might of his own dragon Vhagar. Aemond was eager to take the battle to the foe. "The whore on Dragonstone is not the threat," he said, "no more than Rowan and these traitors in the Reach. The danger is my uncle. Once Daemon is dead, all these fools flying our sister's banner will run back to their castles and cause us no more trouble." East of King's Landing on Dragonstone, Queen Rhaenyra was also faring badly, albeit in a very different manner to that of her half-brother, King Aegon. The death of her son Lucerys had been a crushing blow to a woman already broken by pregnancy, labour and stillbirth. When word reached Dragonstone that Princess Rhaenys had fallen, angered words were exchanged between the Queen and Lord Corlys Velaryon, who blamed her for his wife's death. "It should have been you," the sea snake shouted at her grace. "Lord Staunton sent to you, yet you left it to my wife to answer and forbade your sons to join her." Every man and woman in Dragonstone knew that Prince Joffrey and Prince Jacaerys had been eager to fly with Princess Rhaenys to Rook's Rest with their own dragons. "Only I could lighten her heart," the fool Mushroom claims in his testimonies. "In this dark hour I became the Queen's counsellor, setting aside my fool spectre and pointed hat to lend all of my wisdom and compassion. Unbeknownst to all, it was the jester who ruled them now, an invisible king in motley. Of course, these are unrealistic and large claims from the fool, and ones not borne out by any of our other chroniclers, no more so by the facts. But the truth is, Rhaenyra was far from alone. She had 4 living sons remaining to her, my strength and my consolation, the Queen called them. Aegon the Younger and Viserys, Prince Daemon's sons, were 9 and 7 respectively. Prince Joffrey was but 11, but Jacaerys, the Prince of Dragonstone, was on the cusp of his 15th name day. It was Jacaerys who came to the fore now. As in the Riverlands, from the twins rode Sir Forrest Frey, the very same fool Frey who had once begged for Rhaenyra's hand, now grown into a knight. Lord Samwell Blackwood, who had once lost a duel for her favour, raised her banner over Raventree Hall. Sir Amos Bracken, who had won that duel, followed his lord father when House Bracken declared for Aegon. The Mootons of Maidenpool, the Pipers of Pink Maiden Castle, the Roots of Harroway, the Darrys of Darry, the Mallisters of Seaguard, and the Vances of Wayfarer's Rest all announced their support of Rhaenyra. The Vances of Artana took the other path and swore their allegiance to the young king Aegon. Peter Piper, the grizzled lord of Pink Maiden, spoke for many when he said, "I swore her my sword. I'm older now, but not so old that I've forgotten the words I said, and it happened I still have the sword." The Lord Paramount of the Trident, Grover Tully, been old, even at the Great Council of 101 AC, where he spoke for Prince Viserys. Though now failing, he was no less stubborn. He had favoured the rights of the male claimant in 101, and the years had not changed his views. Lord Grover insisted Riverrun would fight for King Aegon II, yet no such word went forth. The old lord was bedridden and would not live much longer. Riverrun's maester declared, "I would sooner the rest of us not die with him," declared Sir Elmo Tully, his grandson. Riverrun had no defence against dragonfire. He had pointed out to his own sons, and both sides in this fight rode dragons. And so while Lord Grover sat in his deathbed, Riverrun barred its gates, manned its walls, and held its silence. Prince Jacaerys soon brought the Lord of the Tides back into the fold by naming him the Hand of the Queen. Together, he and Lord Corlys began to plan an assault on King's Landing, with Sunfire wounded near Rook's Rest and unable to fly, and Tessarion with Prince Daeron in Old Town. Only 2 mature dragons remained to defend King's Landing, and Dreamfire's rider, Queen Haelena, spent her days in darkness, weeping, and surely could not be counted as a threat. That's only left Vhagar. No living dragon could match Vhagar for size or ferocity, but Jacaerys' reasoning was that if Vermax, Syrax, and Caraxes were to descend on King's Landing, that even the hoary old bitch would be unable to withstand them. The full mushroom was less certain. 3 is more than 1. The dwarf claims to have told the Prince of Dragonstone, but 4 is more than 3, and 6 is more than 4. Even a fool knows that. When Jacaerys pointed out that Stormcloud had never been ridden, that Moondancer was but a hatchling, and that Tyrax was far away in the Vale with Prince Joffrey, he demanded to know where Mushroom proposed to find more dragons. The dwarf claims he laughed and said, "Under the sheets and in the woodpiles, wherever you Targaryens spilled your silver seed." House Targaryen had ruled Dragonstone for more than 200 years, since Aenar the Exile first arrived from Valyria with his dragons. Though it's always been their custom to wed brother to sister and cousin to cousin, young blood runs hot, and it was not unknown for men of the house to seek their pleasures amongst the daughters and even the wives of their subjects, the very small folk who lived in the villages below the Dragon Mount, tillers of the land and fishers of the sea. Indeed, until the reign of King Jaehaerys, the ancient right to the first night had been invoked, made perhaps more often on Dragonstone than anywhere else in the Seven Kingdoms, though good Queen Alicent would surely have been shocked to hear of that, though the first night was greatly resented elsewhere in the realm, as Queen Alicent had learned in her women's councils. Such feelings were muted upon Dragonstone, where Targaryens were rightly regarded as being closer to gods than the common run of men. Here, brides thus blessed upon their wedding night were envied, and the children born of such unions were esteemed above all others, for the lords of Dragonstone often celebrated the birth of such with lavish gifts of gold and silk and lands to the mother. These happy bastards, said to have been born of Dragonseed, and in time became simply known as Seeds. Even after the end of the right to the first night, certain Targaryens continued to dally with the daughters of innkeeps and wives of the fishermen, so Seeds and the sons of Seeds were plentiful on Dragonstone. It was to them that Prince Jacaerys turned, at the urging of his fool, vowing to any man who could master a dragon would be granted lands and riches and dubbed a knight. His sons would be ennobled, his daughters wed to lords, and he himself would have the honour of fighting beside the Prince of Dragonstone against the pretender King Aegon II and his treasonous supporters. Not all of those who came forward in answer to the prince's call were in fact Dragonseeds, nor even the sons or grandsons of Seeds. A score of the Queen's own household knights offered themselves as dragon riders, amongst them the Lord Commander of her Queen's Guard, Sir Steffon Darkland, along with squires, scullions, sailors, men-at-arms, mummers, and 2 maids. Grand Maester Monkkin calls this the sowing of the Dragonseeds, and credits the notion to Jacaerys himself, and not the full mushroom. Others prefer to call it the Red Sowing, given the amount of blood that was spilled. The most unlikely of these would-be dragon riders was in fact Mushroom himself, whose testimony claims at length of his attempt to mount Old Silverwing, one of the dwarf's most amusing tales. However, in truth, there is no basis to this claim. Dragons are not like horses. They do not easily accept men upon their backs, and when angered or threatened, they will attack. 16 men lost their lives during the sowing of the seeds. 3 times that number were burned or maimed. Steffon Darkland was burned to death while attempting to mount the dragon's sea smoke. Lord Gormon Massey suffered the same fate when he approached Vermithor. A man called Silver Dennis, whose hair and eyes lent credence to his claim to be a descendant from a bastard son of Rhaenyra the Cruel, had an arm torn off by Sheepstealer. As his sons struggled to staunch the wound, the cannibal descended upon them and drove off Sheepstealer and devoured the father and sons alike. Yet, Seasmoke, Vermithor, and Silverwing were accustomed to men and tolerated their presence. Having once been ridden, they were more accepting of new riders, and Seasmoke, who had once borne Laenor Velaryon, took on his back a boy of 15 known as Adam of Hull, whose origins remain deep matter of dispute amongst historians to this day. Adam and his brother Alan, 1 year younger, had been born to a woman named Merilda of Hull on Driftmark, the pretty young daughter of a shipwright, a familiar sight about her father's shipyards. The girl was better known as Mouse, for she was small and quick, and always underfoot. She was 16 when she gave birth to Adam in 114 AC, and barely 18 when Alan followed a year later. Small and quick as their mother, these bastards of Hull were silver of hair and purple of eyes, and soon proved to have sea salt in their blood as well, growing up in their grandsire's shipyard and going to sea as boys before the age of 8. When Adam was 10 and Alan 9, the mother inherited the yard upon her own father's death, sold them, and used the coin to take a ship to sea herself. As a mistress of a trading cog, she named Mouse, a canny trader and daring captain. By 130 AC, Marilda of Hull owned 7 ships, and her bastard sons were always serving on one or the other. That Adam and Alan were Dragonseeds, no man who looked upon them could doubt, though their mother steadfastly refused to name their father. Only when Prince Jacaerys put out the call for new dragon riders did Marilda at last break her silence, claiming both boys were the natural sons of the late Sir Rhaenyra Velaryon. They had his look, it is true, and Sir Rhaenyra had been known to visit the shipyards in Hull from time to time. Nonetheless, many on Dragonstone and Driftmark were sceptical of Marilda's claim, for Rhaenyra's disinterest in women was well remembered. None dared to name her a liar though, for it was Rhaenyra's own father, Lord Corlys Velaryon, who himself had brought the boys to Prince Jacaerys for the sowing. Having outlived all of his children and suffered the betrayal of his nephews and cousins, the sea snake seemed more than eager to accept these newfound grandsons, and when Adam of Hull mounted Sir Rhaenyra's dragon, Sea Smoke, it seemed to prove the truth of his mother's claims. But it should not surprise us that Grand Maester Munkin and Septon Eustace both duly assert Sir Rhaenyra's parentage, but Mushroom dissents. In his version of events, the fool puts forth the idea that the bastards of Hull were in fact sired by Corlys Velaryon and not Rhaenyra. Lord Corlys did not share Sir Rhaenyra's erotic predispositions, he pointed out, and Hull's shipyards were like unto a second home to him, whereas Rhaenyra visited them less frequently. Princess Rhaenys, his wife, had a fiery temperament of a Targaryen, Mushroom says, and would not have taken kindly to her lord husband fathering bastards on a girl half her age, and a shipwright's daughter besides. Therefore his lordship had prudently ended his shipyard trysts with Mouse after Alan's birth, commanding her to keep her boys far from court. Only after the death of Princess Rhaenys did Lord Corlys at last feel able to bring his bastards safely forward. In this instance, it must be said, the tale as told by the fool Mushroom does appear the more likely version than that offered by Septon Eustace and Grand Maester Munkin. Many and more at Queen Rhaenyra's court must as surely have thought the same at the time. If they did, they held their tongues. Vermithor, the old King Jaehaerys' own dragon, bent his neck to a blacksmith's bastard, a towering man called Hugh the Hammer, or Hard Hugh, whilst a proud-haired man-at-arms named Ulf the White mounted Silverwing, once beloved of good Queen Alicent. That did not write an end to the sowing of the Dragonseeds. More and worse was yet to come, with dire consequences, as Dragonstone's 3 wild dragons were less easily claimed than those who had known previous riders. Yet, attempts were made upon them all the same. Sheepstealer, a notably ugly mud-brown dragon, hatched when the old King Jaehaerys was still a young boy. He had a taste for mutton, swooping down on shepherds' flocks from Driftmark to the Wendwater. He seldom harmed the shepherds, unless they attempted to interfere with him. Grey Ghost dwelt in the smoking vents high on the eastern side of the Dragonmont. He preferred fish, and was mostly seen flying low over the narrow sea, snatching prey from the waters. A pale grey-white beast, the colour of morning mist. He was notably a shy dragon who avoided men and their works for years at a time. The largest and oldest of the wild dragons was Cannibal, so named because he had been known to feed on the carcasses of dead dragons, and even descending upon the hatcheries of Dragonstone to gorge himself on newborn dragons and eggs. Coal-black with baleful green eyes, the Cannibal had made his lair on Dragonstone, even before the coming of the Targaryens, some Smallfolk claim. Would-be dragon tamers had made attempts to ride him a dozen times, and his cave was littered with their bones. None of the Dragonseeds were fool enough to try and disturb the Cannibal, and any who did not live to tell the tale. Some sought the Grey Ghost, but they could not find him. due to his elusive nature. Sheepstealer proved much easier to flush out, but he remained vicious, ill-tempered, and killed more seeds than the 3 castle dragons together. One who hoped to tame him after his quest for Grey Ghost proved fruitless was Aemond of Hull. Sheepstealer would have none of it. When Alan stumbled from the dragon's lair with his cloak of flame, only his brother's swift actions saved his life. Sea Smoke drove the wild dragon off, as Adam used his own cloak to beat out the flames engulfing his brother. Alan would carry the scars of the encounter on his back and legs for the rest of his life. Yet he did count himself fortunate, as he did live to tell the tale. Many of the other seeds who aspired to ride upon Sheepstealer's back ended up in Sheepstealer's belly instead. In the end, the brown dragon was brought to heel by cunning and persistence of a small brown girl of 6 and 10 who delivered him freshly slaughtered sheep every morning until the dragon learned to accept her and expect her. Grandmaster Munkin sets down the name of this unlikely dragon rider as Nettles, while the full mushroom tells us the girl was a bastard of uncertain birth called Nettie, born to a dockside whore. By any name, she was black-haired, brown-eyed, brown-skinned, skinny, foul-mouthed and fearless, and the first and last rider of the dragon Sheepstealer. Thus did Prince Jacaerys achieve his goal, for all the death and pain it had caused, the widows left behind, the burned men who would carry their scars until the days they died. The dragon riders had been found. As 129 AC drew to a close, the prince prepared to fly against King's Landing. The date he had chosen for the attack was the first full moon of the new year. Even as Jace laid his plans regarding the Dragonseeds, a new threat was closing from the east. Broken by the loss of her son Lucerys, Rhaenyra Targaryen seemed to find a new strength after sending her youngest children away from Dragonstone for their own safety. She shed away her fears, leaving only anger, rage, and hatred. The Blacks still possessed more dragons than Aegon and the Greens, and Rhaenyra now resolved to use them, no matter the cost. She would rain down fire and death upon Aegon and all of those who remained loyal to him, she told the Black Council, and either tear him from the Iron Throne or die in the attempt. A similar resolve had taken root across Blackwater Bay in Aemond Targaryen, ruling the realm in his brother's name as Prince Regent, whilst Aegon lay abed. Contemptuous of his half-sister Rhaenyra, Aemond One-Eye saw a greater threat in his uncle, Prince Daemon Targaryen, the Rogue Prince, and the great host he was gathering at Harrenhal. He summoned his bannermen and council, where the prince announced his intent to bring the battle to his uncle and punish the rebellious Riverlords. He proposed to strike the Riverlands from both the east and the west simultaneously, and thus force the Lords of the Trident to fight on 2 fronts at once. Lord Jason Lannister had assembled a formidable host in the western hills. 1,000 armoured knights and 7 times as many archers and men-at-arms. Let him descend from the high ground and cross the Red Fork with fire and swords, while Sir Criston Cole marches forth from King's Landing, accompanied by Prince Aemond on Vhagar. The 2 armies would then converge on Harrenhal to crush the traitors of the Trident beneath them, and if Daemon emerged from behind the castle walls, as he surely must, Vhagar and Aemond would overcome Caraxes, and they would return to the city with Daemon's head. Not all members of the Green Council favoured the prince's bold plan. Aemond had the support of Sir Criston Cole, the Hand, and that of Sir Tyler Lannister, the Master of Coin, but Grandmaster Orwell urged him to send word to Storm's End and add the strength of House Baratheon to his own before proceeding to Harrenhal. Lord Jasper Wilde declared that he should also summon the Hightowers and Prince Daeron from the south, on the grounds that 2 dragons are better than 1. Alicent Hightower, the Queen Dowager, favoured caution as well, urging her son to wait until his brother, the King, and his dragon Sunfire the Golden were healed, so they might too join in the attack. Aemond had no taste for such delays. He had no need of his brothers or their dragons, he declared. Aegon was too badly hurt, and Daeron too young and far away. Yes, Caraxes was a fearsome, savage beast, cunning and battle-tested, but Vhagar was older, fiercer, and twice as large. Septon Eustace tells us that Aemond was determined that this victory should be his. He had no wish to share the glory with his brothers, nor any other man. Nor could he be gainsaid, for until Aegon rose from his bed to take up the sword once more, the regency and the rule of the realm were Aemond's. True to his resolve, the prince rode forth from the gate of the god within 2 weeks, at the head of a host of 4,000 strong. It would be 16 days' march to Harrenhal, he proclaimed. On the 17th, we will feast inside Black Harren's hall, whilst my uncle's head looks down at us from a spear. Across the realm, obedient to his command, Jason Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, poured down out of the western hills, descending with his own power upon the Red Fork and the heart of the Riverlands. The Lords of the Trident had no choice but to turn and meet him. Daemon Targaryen was too old and seasoned a battler to sit idly by and let himself be penned up inside walls, even walls as big as Harrenhal's. Daemon still had friends in King's Landing, and word of his nephew's plans had reached him even before Aemond One-Eye had set out. When told that Aemond and Sir Criston Cole had left King's Landing and were on the march, it is said that Prince Daemon laughed and said, "Pastime," for he had long anticipated this moment. Ravens took flight from the twisted towers of Harrenhal, their destination, Dragonstone.